It is believed that crowded places are safer, and the risk of becoming a victim of an attack is significantly lower. Statistically, this is true, but nothing prevents a criminal from luring their victim into an isolated place to commit something horrifying. Today's story took place in Andria, Italy. This town, rich in historical heritage, has a population of about 100,000 people. It is quite well known among tourists and attracts a large number of visitors daily. For many of the locals, this allowed them to form a tourist business, the main income of which came from guests from other cities and countries. The main tourist attraction in the town became the Castel de Monte, located not far from which the Mansi family lived. The mother and father had an 8-year-old daughter named Graciella. She was their only child and a long-awaited addition to the family. They were the type of businessmen focused on tourists. The Mansi family had owned their own shop for about 10 years, selling nuts and dried fruits right on the street. They had a very advantageous location on the way to the main gates of the castle. The business brought in a decent income. Despite being just 8 years old, Graziella often worked there and helped her parents. She had been oriented toward the family business from a young age, which greatly pleased her parents. The elders worked on one of the main tourist routes, where there was a constant flow of customers, and they sometimes couldn't manage it all on their own. The help of the child was very much appreciated, and Graziella loved feeling like part of the family effort. She was friendly and active, leaving a lasting impression on many who came to shop. August 19th, 2000 was an ordinary Saturday with the maximum number of tourists. Working on weekends was a routine for the Mansi family. At such times, Graziella's grandfather often stood behind the counter. The little girl eagerly came along with him and took on small tasks. Normally, there was a constant stream of people heading to the castle, so it was difficult for her grandfather to leave the shop. Around 7 p.m., the elderly man asked his granddaughter for help once again. He was tired by the evening and wanted to send Graziella to the fountain to fill a small bottle with water. Graziella gladly agreed. She headed toward the fountain, which was about a 5-minute walk away. However, Graziella lingered, and her grandfather immediately began to worry. He didn't want to leave the shop unattended and reassured himself that his granddaughter might have run into someone she knew, which caused her to chat and get delayed on her way back. But when more than 20 minutes passed and the child still hadn't appeared, the man realized something was wrong. He decided to go to the fountain himself and check what could have kept responsible Graziella. To his surprise, he didn't find the girl either on the way or near the fountain. The man checked all the nearby streets, even walked along them, but still couldn't find the child. Everything seemed suspicious. The grandfather returned to the shop, hoping that Graziella had taken a different route and had already returned. But she wasn't there. About half an hour after her disappearance, he contacted Graziella's parents, began calling her friends and acquaintances whose numbers he knew. The parents were doing the same, but it turned out that no one had seen the schoolgirl. Eventually, the whole family and several of Graziella's friends gathered in the square near the Mansi shop. Not even an hour had passed. Adults and teenagers split into groups and began searching for the child. Passers-by and even some tourists noticed the commotion. A few people voluntarily joined the search effort. The relatives prepared and took a photo of Graziella from home to show to people. Some of them did indeed say they had seen a girl matching her description earlier that day and in the evening. However, no one had any idea where she had gone or what had happened to her. It was a quiet, peaceful area where nothing unusual ever occurred. It was hard to imagine that someone could have attacked the girl in such a busy place. After a couple of hours of unsuccessful searching, the Mansi family headed to the local police station. The relatives reported the child's disappearance. The police responded enthusiastically to the case. As a result, the Carabinieri joined the search for the missing girl. A few hours after her disappearance, a witness approached one of the officers who was walking with a team through the streets. According to him, he had heard a distressing child's scream coming from the wooded area, a distance away from the Castel de Monte. 2 police officers made their way toward the forest and saw smoke rising from about its center. They didn't think it had anything to do with the girl's disappearance, but decided to check what was going on. They intended to find out what kind of fire it was and call the fire department. However, as they got closer and were about 10 meters from the fire, they smelled the distinct odor of burning flesh. The fire itself didn't appear to be a typical bonfire. As they got nearer, the carabinieri realized that dry leaves had been thrown into the fire. Beneath them lay something resembling a human body. The most chilling part was that the size of the body indicated it belonged to a child, and the clothing description exactly matched that of the missing schoolgirl's dress. The police officers were almost certain that they had found the body of Graziella. The flames had consumed her entire body. She was already burning when they found her and was dead. The forest was immediately searched. Several pieces of the girl's clothing and a lighter, likely used to start the fire, were found, but nothing else that could point to the perpetrators. A more thorough inspection was needed. Additionally, authorities were hoping to obtain surveillance footage as several cameras were positioned around the castle. The forensic expert confirmed the detectives' suspicions. The deceased was Graciella Mansi. As a result of the autopsy, the specialist was unable to provide definitive answers to the investigations and the girl's family's questions. The body was in poor condition, but the conclusion stated that the child had been murdered and deliberately set on fire. News of this horrific case quickly spread through the media. The next day, journalists literally began to swarm the Mansi family. When the girl's relatives were notified of what had happened, they initially couldn't believe it was Graziella. The spontaneous act of cruelty seemed so monstrous that the entire region was shaken. The media actively spread rumors about the horrifying murder that took place near the famous castle. The public was terrified by the event. The flow of tourists significantly decreased due to the news. Visitors considered the area unsafe and feared visiting the attraction, which severely impacted the tourism business in Andria. Investigators wasted no time. From the outset, the police eagerly took up the case. The main theory was an attack by someone who lured Graziella off the tourist path, where there were practically no people, assaulted her, and then set her on fire to destroy all traces of the crime. Of course, Graziella's life hadn't suggested any such dangerous enemies, so the culprit had to be a much older person. Authorities considered several possibilities. They first focused on a list of registered offenders with a history of sexual assaults who might have been in the region at that time. However, this theory lost traction as the investigation progressed. They even analyzed the tourist flow, considering the possibility that the attacker was a traveler looking for random victims, one of whom became innocent Graziella. Gradually, this theory also seemed less likely. The more the police spoke to witnesses, friends, and acquaintances of the Mansi family, the more frequently the name Pasquale Tortoro came up. He was a 20-year-old young man who was known throughout the area. He worked illegally as a parking attendant on the same street where the Mansi family's shop stood. Many people noticed that as soon as Graziella started helping her family, Pasquale would often stare at her in a strange way, and his gaze seemed unsettling. Um, Several people pointed this out, which seemed very suspicious. When authorities spoke to Pasquale's friends, they confirmed their concerns. Some of his acquaintances even joked that the 20-year-old was seriously in love with Graziella. However, in light of what had happened, the jokes of the teenagers seemed much darker than they realized. Could Pasquale have actually been a predator, obsessed with the girl and responsible for her death? His family denied such a possibility, insisting he grew up in a decent household and had no previous run-ins with the law, at least until that fateful night at Castel di Monte. Despite reassurances from his family, Pasquale became the main suspect. As soon as investigators met with him, suspicions only grew stronger. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt with suspicious dark red stains and clear marks of dirt, as if he had been digging in the ground. His face appeared scratched, resembling signs of a struggle. The scratches were small, and the investigators hypothesized that they had been caused by small, childlike hands. Naturally, Pasquale denied any involvement in the attack on the girl. But the more detectives spoke with the young man, the more his story changed, becoming increasingly inconsistent and serious. Just a few hours in the police station, and Pasquale began to crack. Any doubts the investigators had disappeared when he uttered one disturbing sentence. He said he found Graciella very beautiful, despite the fact that she was only 8 years old. Furthermore, there were enough contradictions in his accounts to suggest he was trying to hide too much from the police. In one version of events, Pasquale claimed he had walked through the forest, where the burning body was later found, when he noticed the child's lifeless body. He said he saw the body engulfed in flames, and scared, he ran away, only for the police to show up afterward. Later, he added to his story, saying that he had seen Graciella heading toward the fountain to get some water. He approached the girl, who wasn't afraid of him as she had often seen him around. Until that point, he had always behaved calmly and appropriately. Pasquale said that a dog had recently given birth to puppies in the local forest and offered to show them to her. When the criminal was finally broken, he admitted that he had lured her into the forest and set her on fire, as he wanted to destroy all traces of his crime. The young man insisted that he had no intention of torturing her. His real goal had been some kind of sadistic game that simply got out of control. All these facts were eagerly spread by the media, which added their own rumors and horrifying details to each news story. This caused confusion, but the real motive for the murder still remained unclear. After all the contradictory statements, Pasquale's story didn't end there. The police wanted to hear the true version of events. His words contained numerous gaps, clear lies, and inconsistencies with the evidence. He provided the Carabinieri with a timeline of events and other valuable information, but continued to evade many questions regarding the attack and the motive for the crime. It was obvious that the fire had started around 10 p.m., but the child had disappeared almost 3 hours earlier. What had happened during that time? The trigger for the arson had been voices. Pasquale had heard people walking near the forest and was sure that the search for Graciella had begun. The most chilling part of the forensic conclusion was that the coroner believed the girl had still been conscious and alive at the time of the fire. The Carabinieri continued to question the suspect. It seemed strange that, despite the severity of the situation, he had only a few small scratches on his face. How could he have dealt with the girl so easily? Doubts began to arise about whether he had acted alone. It was possible that someone had assisted him. The decision was made to repeat the interrogation. Eventually, Pasquale expressed a willingness to cooperate with the investigation and reveal the full truth, which he had previously been afraid to share. According to him, he didn't lead the girl into the forest with the intent to harm her on his own. In fact, he was influenced by a group of boys aged 18 to 20. At that time, they were waiting for him in the forest: Giuseppe Di Bari, Vincenza Caratello, Domenica Margiotto, and Michele Zagara. Pasquale claimed that they hadn't planned or done anything extreme. He had gotten into an argument with these young men, which he lost. He reportedly felt pressured to comply, and his friends insisted that he lead Graciella into the woods. Once there, all four of them approached her, and what followed was a troubling sequence of events, during which they held her there for several hours, not allowing her to leave. They made her stay quiet, but when they heard that the girl was being searched for, they became anxious. The entire group was afraid of the consequences they might face, so they decided to set the scene in a way that would eliminate any trace. However, they didn't have the materials with them to do so. Instead of searching for what they needed, they continued to torment Graciella until she passed out. Afterward, they attempted to destroy her clothing in a way that could have caused harm, but this was insufficient. At that moment, she regained consciousness and screamed, prompting the young men to act aggressively again, leading to her losing consciousness once more. They covered her body with leaves and tried to set her clothing on fire with a lighter, and this time the flames caught. All of the young men involved were between 18 and 20 years old. As it became known, they came from respectable families, not from marginalized backgrounds, making their actions seem incomprehensible and shocking. People who knew them well described them as calm and rational young men, with no history of cruelty or criminal tendencies. The only one who had previous legal issues was the one involved in a minor incident. Therefore, their decision seemed completely out of character and hard to understand. After Pasquale revealed the identities of his friends, the police quickly apprehended all four young men. This news shocked all of Italy, and it was widely covered by the media. When the suspects were arrested, they initially denied any involvement in Graziella's death, insisting that they had no idea why they were under investigation. However, detectives were determined to continue their questioning until they could uncover the full truth about what happened that fateful night in the forest. Unlike Pasquale, these young men had no signs of injury, no scratches on their faces or bodies. Searches of their homes yielded no compromising evidence. They continued to claim that Pasquale Torratore had strange feelings for the girl, but they were not involved in what had occurred. Despite hours of interrogation, none of the suspects confessed to their involvement. As a result, they were eventually released, though they remained under close surveillance by the authorities as suspects. Strangely, it was later revealed that these four young men had carried Graziella's coffin at her funeral, which took place before Pasquale's confession. They were seen crying as if they were truly mourning a great loss. When they were detained, the young men claimed that they had been deeply affected by the event, as they knew Graciella, even though they hadn't interacted much with her. They often saw the sweet girl at the Mansi family's shop. The police became suspicious that the four young men attended the funeral for more than just emotional reasons. Despite not being close to the grieving family, the young men may have felt a sense of guilt they wished to atone for, or were simply trying to find out where the investigation stood and whether they were being suspected of involvement in the crime. The funeral had attracted residents from all over the town, even a few concerned tourists. As a result, the four grieving young men blended in with the crowd and drew little attention. When they were brought back in for further questioning, each suspect was interviewed separately. Vincenza and Giuseppe insisted that they had alibis. According to them, around 7 p.m. on the day Graziella went missing, both of them were at a local gaming club. Mikkel and Domenica immediately refused to cooperate with the investigation. They chose not to answer any questions and demanded legal representation. Naturally, this only heightened the detectives' suspicions. At this point, the authorities could only verify the alibis provided by Vincenza and Giuseppe, so they went to the computer club. The friends had indeed been there, but they left about an hour later and couldn't provide a reliable alibi for the time afterward. Therefore, it seemed plausible that they could have been involved in the mistreatment of the victim. Unexpectedly, Michele and Domenica confessed to the crime. They mostly confirmed Pasquale Tortora's version of events. According to them, their friends invited them into the forest that evening to, as they put it, play with fire. When they arrived, they discovered that the rest of the group was already there. Pasquale had been tasked with luring the girl, and naturally he chose Graziella, who, according to many of their friends, seemed to stir strange feelings in him and could easily be taken advantage of. The others simply hid behind trees and waited for the victim to arrive with her teacher. Pasquale confirmed that he had encountered the girl near the fountain while she was drawing water, and he had suggested she come see puppies that had been born in a nearby part of the forest. The 8-year-old innocent girl didn't suspect that this would end in such brutality, so she became interested and agreed to go. He managed to deceive and lure the child because Graziella loved animals and eagerly embraced the chance to see the puppies. Moreover, she trusted the familiar young man and didn't expect such betrayal. The wooded area where the crime took place was only about a 15 to 20-minute walk from where the suspect had met the girl, and by that time her grandfather was already actively searching for her. Once they reached the designated spot, the other criminals emerged from their hiding places. Graziella was terrified. It was likely that she realized at that moment that she had fallen into a trap, but it was too late. The child was powerless against her tormentors. The young men were lightly intoxicated and continued drinking. For some reason, they found it incredibly amusing that the girl was so frightened. According to the suspects' statements, they did not plan to cause harm, but simply wanted to scare the defenseless girl. Graciella was so frightened that she was in shock. At some point, the situation got out of control, and she accidentally fell, hitting her head on a rock, after which she lost consciousness. The young people claimed that they hadn't initially intended to cause physical harm, but merely wanted to create a frightening situation. However, when she lost consciousness, they became scared, thinking she might be in danger. In panic, they decided to cover up the incident, and in search of a solution, they came up with the idea of using fire to destroy evidence. However, after a forensic examination, it was found that the injuries were not as severe as initially thought and did not confirm the presence of serious violence. Nevertheless, the condition of the victim remained concerning, casting doubt on the true intentions of the participants in the incident. However, it was not possible to confirm this. The body was badly burned, and the Carabinieri believed that some of the evidence could have been destroyed by fire, as the group of boys had hoped. The story of the sadistic game seemed fabricated. The authorities were looking for ways to confirm that it had all been a monstrous child rape, considering the injuries on the victim's body. The detainees at that time continued to insist that it had all been an accident. It was decided that the fate of the juvenile offenders would be determined in court. Two members of the group never admitted their guilt in the crime. Vincenzo and Giuseppe confessed that they had simply come to the forest because Pasquale had called them. They had no idea what the fire game involved and were shocked by what had happened. According to their confession, they quickly left because they didn't want to be involved. But these young men also didn't suspect how dangerous this game could be. They were simply too afraid to report it to the police, fearing either retaliation from the others or legal problems that would inevitably arise if they were accused of involvement. Despite all the contradictions in the story, by the end of the trial, Pasquale Tortora received the lightest sentence. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. There were two main reasons for this. The first was his confession. Of the entire group, he was the first to willingly cooperate with the investigation. Secondly, no matter how many tests the detectives conducted, everything always pointed to the fact that it wasn't Pasquale who had set the fire on the child's body. Although he played an active role in the abuse of the victim, the investigators were certain that the other four were responsible for disposing of the body. The other criminals faced harsher punishment. They were found guilty of kidnapping, child abuse, and premeditated murder, and sentenced to the harshest possible punishment: life imprisonment in solitary confinement. It was understood that they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars with no contact with other prisoners. Graciella's mother fainted during the reading of the verdict. Her husband assisted her. The families of the defendants began openly arguing. The victims' relatives believed that the criminals got what they deserved, except for Pasquale, who received too lenient a sentence for luring their child into the woods and condemning the girl to death. What angered the most was the harsh decision of the court for Vincenzo and Giuseppe. They continued to insist on their innocence. The two were so vehement in their defense that they even found supporters who believed their story. But this did nothing to help them dispute the verdict. 8 years passed after these events. At the age of 27, Vincenzo Caratello, in a state of hopelessness or guilt for his actions, decided to voluntarily end his life. At that time, he was in prison and managed to smuggle a rope from his bathrobe into his cell, with which he took his life. A few days before that, his mother had come to visit him in prison. The woman continued to firmly believe in his innocence and fully supported her son. But Vincenzo, at that moment, had almost completely lost the will to live. Despite the fact that he was still alive, his mother felt that Vincenzo was already gone, and her maternal instincts were not wrong. On June 19, 2013, lawyer Michele requested a retrial due to some judicial errors. He disagreed with the outcome, but the court rejected the motion. Pasquale's mother publicly addressed the Mansi family, expressing her deep regret for what her son had done. She believed he should face the consequences of his actions according to the law. Graciella's mother, however, couldn't accept these apologies and responded firmly, stating that Pasquale should at least experience some of the pain their daughter went through. She believed that if Pasquale hadn't lured her into the forest, the girl would still be alive. Because of this, Graciella's parents primarily held Pasquale responsible for the tragedy. Graciella Mansi's name remains remembered in Italy. Near Castel del Monte, a small memorial stone with her name, a photograph, and a brief summary of the life of the young girl whose life ended so tragically can still be found. Locals and tourists often leave flowers and toys, and it is frequently visited by the girl's family. 24 years after the tragedy, Pasquale Tortoro was granted early release. His sentence was reduced by 6 years due to his good behavior. At 44, he decided to begin a new chapter in his life. It's unclear whether he will be able to do so successfully, but he was the only one of the group tried under a faster procedure, which allowed for a more lenient punishment. Immediately after the incident, the others stopped communicating, and their relationships never fully recovered, even after Pasquale's release. Pasquale has said that not a day goes by without him thinking about what happened and the pain he caused Graciella and her family. He has expressed that if given the chance to turn back time, he would not have made the same decision. His family has been a source of strength in helping him through this difficult period. He is grateful to those who gave him the opportunity for a fresh start. Graciella's mother spoke out about Pasquale's early release, expressing that it left her feeling that justice had not been fully served. She believes that people like him don't change and remain a danger to society, and therefore shouldn't be given a second chance. Vincenzo and Giuseppe, still claiming their innocence, struggled to understand why Pasquale had acted as he did. When Vincenzo made the tragic decision to end his life, he left a note expressing his continued belief in his innocence and frustration with the injustice he and his friends faced. He trusted that, in time, others would understand his perspective, but he chose to end his own battle for freedom. Giuseppe, Domenica, and Michele remain in isolation. Giuseppe continues to insist on his innocence, spending all of his time reading the Bible. He has come to terms with his sentence and does not attempt to appeal the court's decision. However, he genuinely believes that he will be released from prison once his complete lack of involvement in the girl's murder is eventually revealed and proven. His lawyer and family, like him, firmly believe in Giuseppe's innocence, as well as in the innocence of Vincenzo, who is no longer with them. The three of them continue to claim that Pasquale is the main culprit of the tragedy. They assert that he not only lured the girl into the forest, but also brutally tortured, raped, and burned her. They point to the fact that only Pasquale's body showed signs of struggle, scratches from the girl, and his clothes were stained with dirt and her blood. The others had no scratches or dirt on them. Despite this, Pasquale received the lightest sentence and is already free. If you liked my work, please subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Let's discuss in the comments what you think. Who do you believe is the main culprit in this tragedy, and are the sentences fair? Thank you, and goodbye.